Have you ever looked at the world and just wondered why everything seems so competitive? Why it's always one country against another? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful ways to understand all that chaos, a theory called realism. Think of it as a special lens that makes the messy world of global politics suddenly snap into focus.
I mean, it's the question that's on everyone's mind, right? We all hope for peace, for countries to get along. And yet you turn on the news and it's filled with tension, rivalries, and sometimes even outright war. Why does this keep happening over and over again all throughout history?
Well, realism has an answer. Now, it's not a very cheerful one, I'll warn you, but it's a really practical and powerful one. It gives us a kind of toolkit for figuring out why nations do the things they do. So let's get right into it and open up that toolkit.
Okay, so the first thing you have to get about realism is where it's coming from. It all starts with a very specific mindset. And honestly, it's a pretty pessimistic one. It doesn't look at the world through rose-colored glasses. Not at all.
It all boils down to these four big ideas, and they really build on each other one by one. It starts with a pretty dim view of human nature itself. From there, it argues that if people are self-interested, then relations between countries are naturally going to be full of conflict. And if that's true, what becomes the number one priority? Yep, national security and just plain survival. This all leads to the final point, a deep, deep skepticism that we can ever really escape this cycle. So let's dig into that first point about human nature. This is where it all begins for realists. Thinkers like Hans Morgenthau said that deep down, all of us have this endless will to power. We want to have influence, we want to be in control. And for realists, this isn't a moral judgment. It's not good or bad. It's just a fundamental fact about who we are.
And you can see how this scales up, right? If individual people are hardwired to seek power, then the states they run are going to behave the exact same way. So for a realist, international politics is, at its heart, just a grand-scale struggle for power. That's the name of the game. This is exactly why the state is so incredibly important in realist thinking. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes gave us this really grim but powerful image of what life would be like without some authority to keep us in line. So in the realist view, the state is the hero of the story. It's the ultimate protector, the only thing saving us from total chaos. Okay, so the state is the bodyguard inside its own borders. But what happens when you put all these power-hungry states together on the world stage? Who's in charge then? Who protects the states from each other?
The realist answer to who's in charge is simple and kind of terrifying. Absolutely nobody. This brings us to probably the single most important concept in their whole toolkit: anarchy. Now, when you hear that word, you probably think of riots and chaos, but in international relations, it just means there's no world government. There's no global police force, no 911 you can call when things go wrong. Every single country is on its own. And living in this kind of system has huge consequences. First, it means the state is the absolute star of the show. Sure, you have organizations like the UN, but realists would say they're secondary players. They only have as much power as the big states allow them to have. At the end of the day, every state has to act rationally to protect its own interests, because you can't count on anyone else to do it for you.
So if every country is looking out for number one in a world with no boss, what's the one thing they all need to make sure they survive? Well, the answer is pretty simple: power. This really is the heart of it all. Before a country can even think about improving its economy, or focusing on human rights, or tackling climate change, it has to do one thing first: guarantee its own existence. Survival is job number one, and everything, and I mean everything else, comes second.
So how do you guarantee survival in a world of anarchy? You get power. Power is the currency of international politics. It could be military might, a booming economy, or just major diplomatic clout. Whatever form it takes, power is what lets you protect yourself and push back against threats.
And this constant drive for power creates a super competitive world. Realists often see international relations as a zero-sum game. Think of it like a pizza. There's only so much to go around. If my slice gets bigger, that means your slice has to get smaller. This kind of thinking makes deep, lasting trust between countries incredibly difficult to build and even harder to maintain.
Now, this competitive zero-sum logic leads us straight to one of the most famous and, frankly, most tragic ideas in all of realism. It's called the security dilemma. Here's the crazy paradox at the center of it. Let's say a country decides to build up its military, just for defense, just to feel a little safer. They have zero intention of attacking anyone.
But think about it from their neighbor's perspective. They don't know that. All they see is a bigger, stronger army right next door, and that makes them feel really, really insecure.
And that kicks off this dangerous, vicious cycle. So state A builds up its defenses to feel safe, but now state B is nervous, so what do? They build up their military in response, which of course makes state A look over and say, whoa, look what they're doing. So they build up even more. In the end, both countries have spent a ton of money, and they're both way more on edge and less secure than they were when they started. It's a tragedy driven purely by fear and uncertainty.
Now, countries try to manage this constant feeling of insecurity by creating a balance. For most of history, that meant a balance of power, where you'd form alliances to make sure no single country got way too strong. But then the nuclear age showed up and changed the rules entirely. It created something new, a balance of terror. The whole idea of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, meant that stability didn't come from being the strongest, but from the terrifying reality that everyone was equally vulnerable to being wiped off the map.
So, with all that said, where does this leave us? What's the final takeaway? What does realism say about our chances for a better future? Well, this brings us to the last and most sobering tool in the kit.
To put it bluntly, realists are not big believers in permanent progress. They don't see history as a straight line moving towards a more peaceful, cooperative world. They see it as a cycle that just repeats. The names on the map might change, the technology might get more advanced, but those basic human drivers, fear, self-interest, and the struggle for power, they believe those are timeless and they're not going anywhere.
So now you have the realist lens. The next time you see a headline about a trade war or a new alliance or a military buildup, try looking at it this way. Realism might not give you the warm and fuzzy answers, but it gives you a powerful, no-nonsense way to understand why these conflicts keep happening. It forces you to ask some really tough questions about power and survival. And when you start looking for those answers, you might find the world looks very different indeed.